Hi all, I apologize that there are going to be quite a few portions of these notes that we can go ahead and skip and you can cross out. That might even be something that is exciting rather than a downside. So this explore problem, I'm just going to have us not worry about that one and you can skip that part. So something that's going to be covered in this section, 0.5, is going to be looking at interpreting decimals, rounding decimals, and also being able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide them. All right, so I'm going to have us jump straight into our place value information. So as we saw in section 0.2, the real number system is positional, and digits have different values depending on where they are placed. To express fractional values less than 1, digits are written to the right of the decimal point. Like the whole number place values, the decimal place values get smaller by a factor of 10 as we move to the right. The first fractional position is 1/10. So we skip the ones place. So something to kind of keep in mind with that is we skip the ones place for decimals. We start with the tenths. So this would represent 1 out of 10. This would be 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000. And so this is our decimals, and you'll notice that all of them have the TH in its place value in the end. If we understand place values, there are always multiple ways to read or interpret any given decimal. For example, the decimal 0.2 can be interpreted in each of the following ways by simply adding zeros that are assumed for blank positions. So you can add as many zeros as you'd like for these positions here. It doesn't change the value. So if we think of this in the tenths place, this is 2/10, or 2 over 10. If we think of this as 0.20, then we can think of it as 20 hundredths, or 20 over 100. And if we think of this as 0.200, then we can think of this as 200 thousandths, or 200 over 1,000. So we can think it also like 0.5. We know that that's 50%, so we can think of that as 0.50. Also, if you guys want to put the 0 in front of the decimal, you can, but you don't have to. It's totally up to you if you decide to put the 0 in front. It will also accept it on my math lab either way. So if we think of this as 0.25 and we think of it in terms of tenths, we'd then be focusing on our decimal place value here. So this would be 2.5 tenths. If we think of it in terms of hundredths, we can use both decimal place values. So this is in the hundredths place right now, the way that it is. So this would be the same as 25 over 100, or 25 hundredths. If we were to think of it in the thousandths place, we would use 3 decimal places. So we could add a 0 here. And this then would be in the thousandths place. So this would be the same as 250 out of 1,000, or 250 thousandths. So if we look now at rounding decimals, what we just learned will help us. I'm really quickly going to go ahead and just copy down our place value chart at the top here so we have it for reference. We are also going to use those same rules that we used for section 0.2 for rounding. So those will not change. Okay, so we have our place values right there. So I'm going to use those same rules that we learned from section 0.2. This one says to round to the nearest 10. So I'm going to write the number, and I'm going to first underline the tens place. So that's going to be the 3. I'm going to circle the number that's just to the right. So it is a 7, so that tells me I'm going to round up the 3. So it will be 2,940, and then everything that follows can become a 0. Now, you do not have to write all of those decimal places as zeros. So instead, if you just wanted to end at the last part to make it a whole number, you can do that as well. Okay, looking at example 2, if we round to the nearest 10th, I'm going to still write the whole number down. And if we're now rounding to the nearest 10th, the 1 will be in the tenths place, and the 4 will determine if it rounds up or not. This one will not round up because it's below 5, so our answer will be 2,937.1, and you could include all of those zeros replaced after that, or you can just write it as 2,937.1. Both of those will work. Okay, if we round to the nearest hundredth, that's going to be 2 places after the decimal. So in this one, I'm going to underline the 4, and the 5 will tell me if I round up or not. Because it's a 5, I'm going to round up, so this will become 2,937.15, and you could include the zeros after, or you could just leave them off. Either way works. And the last one says to round to the nearest 1,000. So this one says nearest 1,000th. So that's going to be 3 places after the decimal. So on this one, I'm going to underline the 5, and the 8 is going to be circled. Because it's an 8, I'm going to round the 5 up. So I get 2,937.146 because the 5 will get rounded. And we can place a 0 after, or we can just write it without. And the last one says to round to the nearest 1,000. So for this one, we're going to underline the 2. The 9 tells me that I will round up. So we end up with 3,000. And you can write all the zeros after the decimal, or you can just write it as 3,000. Either way works. For our decimal places, for these ones, just like in the last section with fractions, I really just want you guys to be able to type it in the calculator. With this level class, I don't want us to take a bunch of time and focus on how to do the actual problems by hand. I want us to take the time to just type it in the calculator and know how to get that answer. So I'm going to go ahead and type in A, B, and C into the calculator, and you guys can check yours just to see that they match. Okay, that's what we should get for example 3. Sometimes you will have decimals that have different place values. Again, I just want you to be able to round or to do these in the calculator and just be able to do the computations that way. So again, I'll pause and so you can check your answers with what I have. Okay, that's what we get for example 4. For example 5, this one says to perform the following addition 2 different ways. For part A, it says to round each value to the nearest tenth and then add. So for this one, we're going to round first. So I'm going to take 59.46 and I'm going to round to the nearest tenth. So that means I'll underline the 4 and round this 6. So that tells me that, I'm going to circle the 6. That tells me that I'm going to round up for the 4. So this would be 59.5. For the number 64.26, round to the nearest tenth, I'm going to underline the 2. The 6 tells me that it'll round up. So I end up with 64.3. Now we can go ahead and add the numbers. So this would be 59.5 plus 64.3. and we get 123.8. For part B, it says to add and then round the sum to the nearest tenth. So for this one, we're not going to add first. We're going to add first. We're not going to round first. So no rounding, skip the rounding part and just add them. So 59.46 plus 64.26. We end up with 123.72. Now that it's done with adding, now we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So it will stay a 7, so we get 123.7 because a 2 follows, so it does not round up. All right, and it asks if there is a difference between answers A and B. It changed by just 0.1. That was the only difference. Yes, by 0.1. Here are directions on how to multiply and divide decimals. Again, I really just want us to be able to do it in our calculator. So with example 6, you're just going to multiply those together. I'll go ahead and pause the video and then you can check your answers. Okay, that is what we get with example 6. When dividing the quotient, we might end or have repeating, the quotient might end or have repeating digits. There are more than one repeating digit. You can write this quotient using a bar over the repeating block of digits, or write enough digits to show the pattern and end with ellipses. So you can see here the notation of what it looks like when we have a number that's repeating. So if we take 5 divided by 9, we just end up with 0.5 repeating, and it can be represented in any of the following ways. If we have more than one number being repeated, it will group it like we see in the next 2 rows. This concludes what we are going to cover in our notes and what your homework covers for section 0.5, so you do not have to worry about the other pieces of 0.5 in the notes. If you have any questions, please let me know.